Why is slavery wrong? It might be perceived as provocative to so much as ask the question, but we can still do so in hopes of gaining some potentially useful insights. So, what is right and what is wrong are obviously large topics, but here, something that could be touched upon would be appealing to the intuition that if a potentiality that could, in principle, be realized is restricted, that can strike us as wrong, or at least possibly so. So, for example, nobody would accuse a person of anything wrong, doing anything wrong, if they refuse to read to a rock, if they do not speak to a stone. And yet, if an adult, if a parent refuses to at least speak and per his or her capacities read, of course, not everybody's literate per what's possible, to his or her children, then they certainly could be accused of wrongdoing. What's the difference? Why is it not bad to not speak to a stone, but it is bad to not speak to a child? The difference, of course, lies in the potentialities involved. A stone cannot benefit from being spoken to. A rock cannot benefit from being read to, but a child certainly can, and setting aside certain nonverbal and such outliers possibly, will benefit from being spoken to and being read to. Right? And therefore, if a parent does not at all verbally interact with his or her child, unless that's impossible for the parent given the conditions, then we say something is off here. Potential should be realized. Why not? Right? Well, as long as it doesn't harm somebody or isn't obviously bad, like the potential maybe of a poisonous snake to bite somebody, then we have the intuition that potential should be realized. So, in connection with the question of slavery, what potential, broadly speaking, does slavery restrict or minimize the realization of? Seemingly, kind of a broad way to put it would be that slavery treats uh, human beings as objects, as means, and not as things. So as that they may, or in light of the end of them doing some sort of labor, right, in a machine like way. Meaning, there's certainly very many ways to construe the purpose of each and every person and of people in general. Uh, to me, the person at the cash register, his or her purpose might be just to check me out at the grocery store. The purpose of somebody that is supposed to fuel up my gas tank in places where that's how it works. That's their purpose, is to fuel up my gas tank. The purpose of a secretary, if I have one, might be to take phone calls and to take notes. Everybody has a purpose relative to my ends and my desires. Right? There's so many ways to perceive people. This is my friend. This is my enemy. This is a politician. This is an athlete. This is an artist. But the question is there any kind of broad human potentiality such as is restricted by treating a person as a thing, as a means to an end? To potentially shed some light on that question, it could be worth asking, what could potentiality realized by way of persons look like? If my potential is not restricted as a human being, then what can I become? And here, it could be useful to appeal to, so to say, the inward aspect of experience, meaning my own individual point of view, my first person subjective point of view. I can be many things to many people. I can wear many hats in society, to my family, to my friends, to my neighbors, to my community. Right? But to myself, to and for myself, what am I? How do I experience life? What is my life in the broadest connotation of the terms? And we see here that if I proceed properly in my development, then I can work out the aspects of my life of myself such as are distinctly human. I can develop the capacity to pursue truth to the best of my present ability. Right? Not just what works for me, what do I like, what don't I like, but what is actually so. It doesn't need to be that complicated. For example, I can say that uh, if I hold up two fingers, I can say the correct word to denote the amount of fingers that I'm holding up is two. That's true, and that differs from saying it's three or four or five or something else. I can speak truly and think truly to the best of my ability, even if I make mistakes, which I certainly shall. And that's a mistake therein. Further, I can also put the truth that I do discern in front of my will. And I can will, therefore, the good, even when it stands in opposition to my personal preferences. So, for example, the truth is that I owe you, to use the number again, two units of currency and change. For example, $2 I owe you in change, but I only want to give you one so that the other one can go to me. But I'm going to instead put the truth that I owe you $2 in front of my will to so say, that's what I'm going to do. I'm still going to give you $2. I want to treat you like a thing, like an object, but it's true that you're more than a thing and an object. So I'm going to treat you as more than a thing, as more than an object. I won't just claim that self-centeredness belongs to me alone, but not to you. You don't have the right to be self-centered as I do. Right? I'm going to go to the front of the line just because I'm me and you're not me. I get all the rights and the benefits just because I'm me. No, everybody's just me, quote unquote, from their own point of view. So I won't do that. So I pursue the truth. I will the good. I try to develop my unique attributes as a particular individual that can't be replicated. And I also try to, again, develop everything in me that is uniquely human and that separates me from, say, cows and pigs and donkeys and so forth, as great as they are for what they're worth. They can be perfect vis-a-vis their ideals, but we have a human ideal and we need to strive, or we can strive toward it. So the idea then would be to relate it to the initial point that if I am, at least from birth, treated as a thing, if I am not given ample opportunity to develop myself, if I am not exposed to a quality education, even just if I grow up in a culture that does not value humanity and proper individuality and such, then I will not realize those potentials, even if I could. Right? I could be perhaps a great human being. I could be myself, but I won't be if I'm not given the opportunity and if I don't take advantage of any opportunity that I do have. And of course, there's also the aspect of my cooperation and my right employment of freedom. I have a bad attitude. Right? I don't want to give you the $2 that I owe you. I just want to give you one. That's on me. But all the same, right? For example, maybe the ideal of a chicken egg is a chicken, not necessarily an omelet, although that can be its end as well. But if the egg is taken from the chicken and turned into an omelet, it will never turn, or taken from the hen, it will never turn into a chicken. The ideal of my physique might be quite different than what my physique is now, but I need the opportunity to work out in order to realize that ideal of my physique. Right? Take three identical triplets, separate them, and they will tend to converge in appearance, accounting for personal factors like weight gain and such. That's because there seems to be an ideal, right? What we would call the DNA, but not to assume that that explains everything, right? An ideal towards which they trend. So we see that that ideal of our own individuality and of our own humanity, it needs to be realized. It's not just there off the bat, without effort, without environment, without education. It's not just handed to us and such. So then, again, to relate it to the point, slavery, which treats people as things, as means, as opposed to as ends, would be wrong and is wrong, certainly for that reason. It is just because we can be more than machines, we can be more than means, we can be more than mechanisms to accomplish economic ends, that treating us as means and machines and mechanisms is so wrong and immoral and, in fact, evil. It precludes the realization of value in the universe, quote unquote, meaning just in the whole, such that could, in principle, be realized. And that is about as bad as it gets. Because what's worse, right? What's worse than the potentiality for some objective values, such as, again, me becoming everything that I can be as an individual, as a human being, me pursuing truth, me pursuing and living out goodness? If that's not realized, what's worse? Well, that said, we can and should hope that slavery in its legal sense continues to be entirely exterminated. Certainly, many strides have been taken in that direction in the past few centuries, prior to which scholars say that slavery was more or less universal, ubiquitous institution, historically speaking. All the same, we see that even as legal slavery dwindles, possibly even though it is said to still certainly be a problem, that does not automatically make us free. Just because we are not legally slaves does not mean that we are not, for all intents and purposes, slaves all the same. How are we slaves all the same? Well, if I treat myself as a means, not an end, as a mechanism, as a machine, and not as a human being, if I give no mind to my mind and to my individuality and to my humanity and to my morality, if I do not pursue truth to the best of my ability, which is not to say I'm speculating on the theories, but I just try to be honest. I try not to lie to myself. I try not to deceive myself, at least that. If I'm not actively trying to be good, if I'm not trying to give value to other people and treat other people as they need to be treated, and so forth, then I am still a slave. And further, I'm likely enslaved to all kinds of appetites and impulses of mine, all kinds of addictions, all kinds of psychological problems, such that preclude that realization of potential as an individual and as a human being. And that is, of course, as tragic, right, if not more tragic, than the institution of legal slavery, right, which is a huge evil, obviously, in and of its own self. But when it's self imposed, when I could, in principle, be free, when I could, in principle, be everything that I can be, and yet out of fear and ignorance and cowardice, I persist in that lowly path of servitude, that's not a good look either, to say the least. So, in summary, it could be said that slavery is very wrong and very evil because it treats people, it treats human beings, it treats those that can be an end to and for their own self as means, as mechanisms, as machines. However, even if that economic institution is eliminated, if I persist in inner slavery, if I'm a slave to profit, if I'm a slave to pleasure, if I pay no mind to myself as it concerns my morality, my individuality, my humanity, and I simply am set on my selfishness and my self-centeredness and my greed and my lust and so forth, then even if on paper I'm not a slave, we better believe that in reality, in truth, we are absolutely slaves. And that is, of course, a tragedy that ought to be urgently addressed by each and every one of us concerning our very own self. So we can think about it. Thank you for listening.